Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Mullen, the Division Director for Planning and Building. Super excited to be here today to talk to you about what our division does. And in a nutshell, Planning and Building is here to help make sure that our community is livable and sustainable into the future. So that's the most visible part of what we do in terms of looking at proposed developments and running those through a public hearing process. But we really do a lot more than that. On the planning side, we ask the question of how our community should grow. And to answer that question at a very high level, that often includes some sort of a public hearing process. So looking at things like overarching policies for the entire county, looking at how our different areas of the county, what they should look like in the next 20 years or so, just recognizing that places like Spanish Springs should probably look different in 20 years than, say, Sun Valley or Incline Village or Verdi or Washoe Valley, that they all have very distinctive characteristics. And what the communities want in those areas could look very differently as well. So we also look at things like which areas should be kept rural, which should be industrial, where is it more appropriate maybe for higher intensity residential or commercial hubs, things like that. Where does it make sense to have urban development standards versus rural development standards? And planning really goes from a very high level, looking at some of those large overarching policies for the entire county, down to also a very granular level as well. So, we may also be looking at things like, is this specific use appropriate in this specific area? Is that distribution warehouse really appropriate next to your house? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is it something that, let's say, if there's a new 530 lot subdivision that's proposed, is that appropriate in that particular location? What would make it be appropriate to be there? Or even something as granular as how high can I build my fence? So in planning, we look at a lot of different things about how the community should look, but planning is often the starting point for development inquiries that come in. And most of the proposed projects, like I said, they go through public hearings to kind of determine at that high level, at that conceptual level, if it makes sense to do what they want to do at that particular location. And our engineering and operations teams are involved in that also, in the sense that, especially on the engineering side, when we're talking about answering those questions or of if it's appropriate, they may be looking at the infrastructure and utility components. They may be looking at things like drainage and grading for the proposals, or for the operations team, if a project is proposed, it gets approved, and then down the road, if some of those facilities become owned by the county, it's that operations team that's going to be maintaining those. So we're really that starting point for looking at the end of the day, what our community is going to look like, what it should look like. On the building side, totally different question. We're asking, is it safe? It's much more cut and dry in terms of, does it meet the codes and standards? And a lot less about should something be done, but rather, does it actually meet those standards? Because if it does, then that building permit gets issued. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about our other services also. Obviously, we've got our land use planning. We just covered a little bit, building permits, all the way from submitting permits, reviewing permits, issuing them, doing inspections. We also cover business licenses for all businesses that operate in the county. Code enforcement is a big piece of what we do as well. Our Regional Water Planning Commission is also housed within the organizational structure of planning and building, but it does operate independently. And then our admin team for Community Services Department actually supports the folks that are within planning and building. They support CSD wide all of our different divisions. So the front desk team, you will see they are part of planning and building as well. And we are all located again in the county complex upstairs, second floor. So our team in planning and building has 50 folks. We've got 6 different divisions. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our planning manager, Trevor Lloyd, to talk a little bit more about the planning team.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Trevor Lloyd. I'm planning manager with the planning program. of Planning and Building. Now, our planning program serves multiple functions. There's 2 planning managers, myself and Chad Geisinger, who we will hear from later. We have 8 planners and 3 wonderful administrative staff, and all very highly professional and incredibly intelligent folks. And what you will notice that planners are very recognizable. We're often very well dressed as we head down to board meetings and commission meetings. What I like to share with some of the younger planning staff is we used to have to carry large sets of plans, maps, file folders, and always struggled finding an easel as we headed out the door into our horse and buggy onto a board meeting. They just look at me in confusion and look back down at their laptop and continue working. But sometimes technology can be a very good thing. All right, so why planning? Well, planning is very exciting for the most part. It is the beginning place for development. It's where development really starts. It helps to provide for quality development and health and community health and welfare. It also ensures for compatible use types from one neighbor to the next. And as you can see on this overhead, not all uses are compatible. In fact, some can be very detrimental and even hazardous in some situations. So it's our job to ensure that there is compatibility and peace among neighbors. There is a hierarchy in planning. It all starts with the master plan. This is essentially the blueprint for future growth and development in Washoe County. The master plan, it is the first step in determining where and how a community or how the county should develop. It establishes a vision and a character that really sets the tone for the form and pattern of development in the county. The regulatory zone or the zoning maps, those are the tools that we use to implement the master plan, and really that gets more into the weeds in terms of how use or how properties can develop, what uses are allowed, lot sizes, as well as densities. We also established the development code, which is really getting into the weeds. That's where the standards are found based on regulatory zones. Some of the examples of different development standards are building placement in terms of setbacks, building heights, fence heights, what landscaping is required, parking and lighting, and many other types of standards. That's all found within the development code. Now, all of these documents are used when applications are submitted to the planning staff. And some of these applications, we're talking about discretionary applications requiring public hearings and an additional review. Some of those include tentative subdivision maps, special use permits, variances, abandonments, and a host of other discretionary applications. I know most of you are familiar with a subdivision map, but you may not be so familiar with a special use permit. What is that and when is it needed? Well, it's typically a use that isn't just allowed by right, but because it may involve or impact the neighbors, it requires a higher level of assessment. In these situations, we also can impose conditions that can soften or help mitigate detriment to neighboring properties. So all of these applications typically run through a public review process. The last line of defense is our code enforcement, which Chad will get into more detail on to ensure that the rules are being followed. There are many responsibilities that under our purview. Of course, updating and maintaining the master plan and the zoning maps is key. Right now, we are in the process of updating and rewriting our master plan through the Envision Washoe 2040 process. If you haven't yet, we ask that you all go on our website, take a look at it, follow it, as you will all be impacted in the future by it. We also assist with the development review process. This includes pre-development and pre-application meetings, answering inquiries, reviewing and approving building permits and licensing. Also, code enforcement and business licensing is the other responsibilities. And finally, this is the last slide. A big part of our responsibility is engaging the public. You may come and walk by this commission chamber sometime and see large groups of people gathered. Very often they're here for planning-related items. We understand that planning can be very emotional when we're talking about proposing, or there's a proposal for a new development in a neighborhood. People have very strong feelings, and so we're very much in the spotlight very often. In fact, I had a slide prepared for that I was told not to use, involving pitchforks and torches. But I was gently reminded, maybe not the best slide to use. So instead, we have pictures of folks that are engaged. How do we work with the public? What is our engagement process? Well, it comes in multiple forms. We send out public notices. We host neighborhood meetings. We conduct surveys. Man, we conduct a lot of surveys. I'd be willing to bet we conduct more surveys than any other department in this county. We hold public hearings and community workshops. In a nutshell, we work very closely with the public. I know there's a misconception that planners are in some back room determining what policies need to be imposed, what zoning goes where, but the reality is quite different. We engage the public because who knows better than the residents of a community what's best for their community, and that's why we seek out and actively engage public participation when we are updating our codes and updating our master plan and zoning maps. Again, our planning can be frustrating at times. It's fraught with a good deal of emotion, but as I mentioned earlier, it's always exciting. There's never a dull moment. So that concludes my presentation. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ariel Lester, the permit coordinator. I'm going to mess this up. I'll leave it up to Ariel. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. So as he said, my name is Ariel Lester. I'm the permit service coordinator for building. Our main objective is to review building plans to ensure that they meet critical life safety components. We do this by ensuring all projects comply with our current safety standards set forth in our international codes, Northern Nevada amendments, accessibility requirements, electrical codes, energy requirements. Some of the examples of permits we see are new commercial and residential, especially lately. It's going up everywhere. Also addition and remodels of those already existing structures. We also permit alternative energy projects such as wind, solar, geothermal. Some of our more simple projects would be re-roofs, water heaters, HVAC systems, electrical, and plumbing. We work very closely with some in-house experts as well as outside agencies. Some of our in-house experts we work with pretty frequently is fire, health, engineering, and planning. Some of our outside partners are the general improvement districts, State of Nevada Housing, which is manufactured housing, environmental protections, and Department of Transportation. We also work closely with Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. So my permit tech team consists of 4 permit techs, our lead, and then myself. Our main objective is we intake all building permits that are coming into the unincorporated Washoe County. We provide guidance to those applicants all the way up until completion of the project. One of the things we've managed to overtake was we went completely electronic, thanks to COVID. So any applicants can submit permits from wherever they are and skip our long waiting lines. For review that are at 9th Street, you know we used to have the longest lines and the most angry customers. So this year, kind of fun fact, the past couple years we've seen a huge increase of permits coming in. Fiscal year 21, we had 4,217. Just in fiscal year 22, we saw an increase of 42%. So you can see we became super busy. And with that, I'm going to hand the other piece over to our amazing plans examiner supervisor, Dan Hawley.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Dan Hawley. I'm with Washoe County Building and Safety. I am the supervisor over the plans examiners, and our team is responsible for reviewing all the plans that Ariel and her team send to us. So she mentioned earlier that about 6,000 permits come into the front counter, and about 75 to 80% of those come to the back, or what I call back of the house, and then they get routed through the different agencies for review. I wanted to touch on a couple of things that were spoken about earlier. Trish, who has left, I think, talked about internal customers. So each of you represent the county, you're our internal customers, and we want to provide you the highest level of service. So if there's anything you ever need from us, please feel free to reach out to us, because it is really an integral part of what we do, is helping one another. I have a couple of members of my team here today. I don't see them. Oh, here they are. Would you guys mind standing? So we have Rosa Landis. She's been with us a couple of years, and Ashley Mazel. Phenomenal employees, great at what they do, and just fun to be part of a team. So we're pretty proud of what we do. So let me get on track here. Couple things I wanted to talk about. So we'll flash back to something that Dave spoke about earlier. Proud architect comes in with his plans, submits them, and is overwhelmed with corrections. Maybe it was just 2 corrections or 4 corrections, whatever it is, it's more than you're expecting, right? So managing those expectations through our intake process is very critical, and assisting our customers and understanding, as Manager Brown said, understanding where people are coming from and what their needs are. Doesn't mean that we can drop everything that we're doing and break all the rules or bend the rules, but we do want to understand what their needs are. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, a little bit about us. Kelly talked about, is it safe? So that's kind of where my presentation takes over. And help me here, am I just arrowing? There we go. So is it safe? What does that mean? Okay, so each of us have been in our community. We've gone to maybe a concert at Lawler Event Center. Maybe someone here today has dropped off a child at a daycare facility. Maybe you have a loved one at a hospital here in the community as well. Have you ever asked yourself, how's this building going to perform if there's an event that takes place? Or, you know, what happens if the power goes out? Or my loved one's going to be safe? Am I going to be able to get out of this building? So kind of in a nutshell, that's what we do. That's what our team looks at when a set of plans comes in. We start to analyze what the use of those plans are and what we need to implement in order to make sure that that building is safe and people can actually get out of the building. We have some pictures here of the permit routing system and the old paper plans that were spoke about earlier. I think it was Trevor that talked about paper plans. There was a time we brought in 6 sets of plans for every project so that we could disperse those quickly. One thing we do pride ourselves in is no matter what we do it in about a 10-day turnaround. And my team members over there are kind of shaking their head. I'm always on them. Do what you want to do, have as much fun as you want, but get the plans out. That's all we ask. So they do a great job of making sure people's plans go out and we're able to get permits. So I'm kind of all over the place. I apologize for that. Ariel made me a little bit nervous this morning. So COVID, let's talk about COVID real quickly. So COVID was not the best thing that ever happened to our community, but behind the scenes for the previous 2 or 3 years, there were people working on ideas and implementing how we could bring in plans electronically, how we could change the way we did business for the past, 30, 40 years, or maybe even more, without impacting our customers, right? So if you reach out to your community and you say, hey, as of tomorrow, we're no longer accepting paper plans, that's a huge impact on a lot of people. But on the professional side, everything starts electronically, and it's really an imposition to go down and print things onto paper and then bring them into us only so that we can throw the paper away and log them into our computer, right? So if you think about that process, it really didn't make sense, but it worked. So COVID actually was a time where we could say, hey, the only way we can keep our doors open and do business is to allow people to submit electronically. And so we stopped accepting paper plans and we went electronic. So that's one positive thing for COVID. So I just wanted to share that. Where are we at on the slides? So we do our permit reviews in 10 days. A lot of those come back for a second or maybe even a third round of corrections. And then ultimately we get our permit out the door. There's some pictures here of inspector taking some measurements in the field, making sure that the structures that are built in the field match the plans. And that's a little bit about what we do, taking it all the way from plan submittal to the building being ready for occupancy. Am I doing this or someone else do it? I'll do it myself. So, oh, great. I haven't seen, this is a new slide, so I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. So these are our plans examiners on their free time. It's nice to see them out doing something fun. So, and then our inspection team. So I talked a little bit about, Ariel spoke about intake. We talked about the plan review process, and then ultimately goes out to the field for inspections, and our field team makes sure that everything complies with what's on the plan and the current codes. And then, like I said, ultimately we can occupy a building. So a couple of things here that we look at things and make sure they work, right? We talked about the life safety aspects and making sure that you and your loved ones can get out of a structure in the event of something major taking place. But also, do things function for all people in our community, right? We look at the accessibility aspects of all of the elements that are placed in a building. Can everyone utilize these facilities? Or, or do we have to stand on a ladder to use an ATM machine? That's not really functional. Making sure our exits function correctly. And then ultimately, we don't want any failures, right? We don't want a structural failure. You read about them, you hear about them. Ultimately, that's number one no-no, so we don't want that. And here's a couple of pictures about some sketchy electrical. These are minor in nature compared to, say, the Surfside condominium project next door, on the other side of the slide. So unfortunately, I've talked about this before, but we learn, especially as adults, from our mistakes, right? We make mistakes through our lives, and even in code process, all of our codes are based on past failures. And so as hopefully we're getting to the end of all the failures, but we still see them, and we're able to modify our codes accordingly and even increase the amount of safety in the structure. And with that, I will turn it over to Chad with code enforcement.
Thanks, Dan Holly. I really appreciate that. So, yes, don't report code violations. This is not ordering you to do homework to report code violations, but no, you can report code violations. So here's the email address to do that, and we get plenty of those. So the previous speakers have been talking about how they try to ensure that everything is done right in the community and that we grow in a responsible and safe manner. Where my program comes in with code enforcement is when things aren't going correctly, when things don't go according to plan, or when people don't follow the plans or follow the rules. And we need to come in and enforce those zoning regulations that Trevor spoke about, because without that enforcement, then those zoning codes really don't matter a whole lot, right? So what is code enforcement and what do we do? I'm going to carry on the theme here that you've been hearing. We basically do code compliance for the unincorporated county, so everything outside of the cities of Reno and Sparks. We have a total of only 4 code enforcement officers, and actually one of those enforcement officers is here today, Mr. Steve Oriole, if you want to raise your hand there. Recently hired to do the enforcement of short-term rentals, which is a new program in the planning department. And so those four code enforcement officers, 2 of them do land use. So two code enforcement officers enforcing the zoning code that Trevor was speaking about for the entire unincorporated area. So basically they're assigned to different geographic areas so that they get to know their area and all of their customers within that area. And yes, they are customers as well, even though we're doing enforcement. Basically they're splitting the county in half. And then we only have 1 enforcement officer that does the entire building code, which is what Dan was just talking about. And so when they don't follow those codes and build according to plan, that's when that enforcement official gets involved. And then we have 1 dedicated officer, Steve, solely to short-term rentals because it is such a labor-intensive program. Most of that activity occurs up in Tahoe because of all the tourism going on there, but we do have them down the valley as well. And as you can see here on the right, this picture, that's kind of an example of a typical property situation that we would get a complaint on. A lot of folks in the community think they're going to call code enforcement. Code enforcement's going to show up. We're going to clean up this mess, and that's not how it works. So The property owners are responsible actually for the conditions on their properties. And what we do is compel them to clean up their properties through the administrative enforcement process. And that gets to this slide right here. You can see some of the codes that code enforcement is responsible for. Some of the things we're not responsible for are the health codes, the fire codes, and the criminal codes, or landlord-tenant issues. So if you've got a smoky building because you're got drafty windows, that's not us. So those are all the codes right there, the different topics. Includes engineering as well with grading. And I know I'm getting short on time here, so I'm going to go into business license. I'm the second planning manager, as Trevor mentioned. I oversee code enforcement, but also business license. So everybody that wants to start a business in the unincorporated area starts with our business license group, and that's these folks here. And Jaylene Pop is in the plaid skirt there. She's the supervisor, the lead, and the rest of the supporting staff, the admin staff, very important for us. And a quick overview of business licensing. Again, we do all the licensings outside the city of Reno and Sparks. Basically, business license break down into time frames. So you have an annual license, which is a permanent use that ties back to the zoning. So they kind of go hand in hand. The zoning authorizes the use, and if it involves a business license, then business license closes that. We also do the quarterly licenses, which are liquor, gaming, and so forth. And then all the temporary events. So like 4th of July celebrations, all those kind of things, outdoor events. There's only 2 staff in the business license program, and they manage $7.3 million. Fun fact on that, a good chunk of that money is utility franchise fees. I don't think a lot of people know that. Bring in millions of dollars from like Nevada Energy and the phone companies. And then a good chunk of that is now coming from cannabis revenue. We have 6 operating cannabis dispensaries in the unincorporated area, and they pay a substantial amount of taxes. So there's a couple of facts there. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly, because I know we're getting short on time. Kelly, thanks.
Chad. All right, so this is one of our wrap-up slides, just to kind of drive home the amount of work that our team in planning and building is doing. As Ariel mentioned, we processed almost 6,000 building permits in FY 2022, and along with that, we conducted over 27,500 inspections related to those building permits. So phenomenally large number of inspections. Altogether, in terms of new construction, the value added to the tax rolls here in Washoe County for FY22, that added almost $750 million in value. The planning team processed over 150 planning permits, and I will say that for those planning permits, those are the ones that involve some sort of a public process, so pretty involved in terms of noticing and getting input back from community members, and also conducting planning or public hearings for many of them. Along with that, we issued over 600 short-term rental permits. That is a good amount of work also that just started last year. Again, most of those are up in the Incline Village area. In FY22, we received over 1,000 enforcement complaints, and that resulted in about 250 violations that were confirmed. And just a last stat for you on the business license side, over 6,500 businesses currently active in Washoe County, 852 new licensees that came in fiscal year 21. And so just to wrap up in terms of big projects that we've had coming through recently important to the program, as Ariel mentioned, back in 2020, we went to that full electronic submittal and review process, which is just, I think, great for most of the folks in the community and staff. And then last year stood up that short-term rental program, which was a multidisciplinary program. Ton of work that went into that multi-year effort, that is now live and operating. And then just super exciting for us, it's coming up. Underway right now, as Trevor mentioned, the update to the county's master plan that's Envision Washoe 2040, where we are expecting to get to hearings and potential adoption next year.